It's a discovery as old as fire and the wheel. Born of ancient alchemies, it provides shelter, protection, and warmth. Durable, pliable, and organic, it has always evoked envy and fascination. Now, leather on Modern Marvels. Near the dawn of civilization, a solitary man began a journey here in the rugged terrain of the Swiss Alps. Whatever his destination, he never made it, dead from an arrow wound in his torso. Remarkably, for the next 5,000 years, his mortal remains stayed beautifully preserved by the frigid cold until they were discovered in 1991. But not only was his body intact, so too were bits of his clothing, a satchel filled with tools, and a pair of waterproof boots, all made of ancient leather.
Leather making goes back to the origins of man, for clothing, for protection, for hunting.
We definitely would not have made it through the ice ages without the ability to tan hide. You know, we had to be able to figure out how to clothe ourselves, and leather's essential for that.
Born of our ingenuity and will to survive, leather may well have been the first man-made product. Its warmth and protection so vital to ancient peoples that it became sacred. Today, leather is our daily companion. Nearly all of us walk in it, ride on it, and wrap it around ourselves. Yet the essence of the material remains the same as it was at the dawn of civilization: raw animal skins.
That is what's so special about leather manufacturing, because first of all, we're dealing with an organic material. We're dealing with a substrate that has come from a live animal.
In the United States, cattle are the most common source of those animal skins, while other countries seek out their own native sources, including many exotic species. And just as in prehistoric times, nearly all of these creatures are primary sources of food and meat.
No part of that animal is wasted. The skin goes one place, the meat goes another. In that way, I regard it as respectful.
But no matter where you are in the world, the basics of transforming animal skin into leather remain the same. Strip away all that's not needed from the hides, then introduce natural or man-made acids to lock in what remains most useful and durable.
Basically, you're impregnating the skin fiber with tannic acid, which builds bridges, small chemical bridges between the actual fibers of the skin, and sort of locks them open into a felted network.
That process is known as tanning. And to see it work, you must travel inside the animal hide to the 3 microscopic skin layers within. During the tanning process, the top and bottom layers are removed, leaving only the middle layer, known as derma. When the tanning acids are applied, they bond with the derma's many protein fibers, creating a complex, well-lubricated whole. Prime Tanning has been manufacturing cow and steer leather for more than 70 years, making it one of the largest leather suppliers in the country.
Our plant capacity is 3 million pounds a week, and that converts, depending on the season, between 50 and 55,000 hides a week.
Throughout the day, a steady stream of trucks delivers hides to Prime's tannery in St. Joseph, Missouri. Each truck delivers nearly 1,000 hides, weighing more than 33 tons from nearby meatpacking facilities.
We see a lot of parasitic damage, a lot of scratches. We see large brands from the ranchers, and to be able to take all those skins down the same path so you'll be able to get a finished piece of leather that has the same color, the same feel, the same texture is such a tremendous challenge.
19 individual operations are required to transform the raw animal hides into a side of usable leather. Because each step directly affects the one that follows, the entire process must be closely monitored.
Manufacturing to where we are, the consistency is really what you want. It's not just, take it, here it is, it's beautiful, but it has to have the right weight, the right chrome content, all the materials that make it go into a good piece of leather.
To begin, hides are loaded into a liming vessel, where they are cleaned to remove blood, dirt, and salt. Calcium hydroxide, better known as lime, is then added to remove the upper layer of skin and animal hair without affecting the rich derma below. Next, the leather maker oversees a series of operations that will open up the fibers within the derma, making them more receptive to the tanning agent to come. That includes deliming the bath with ammonium sulfate, as well as baiting it using a natural enzyme.
The baiting process is a process after delime that we add an enzyme that comes from the pancreas of an animal, and it begins to soften the hide and to clean the surface of the hide.
Now the hides are ready to enter the tanning process. Because of its speed and controllability, commercial tanners like Prime employ chrome salts as their main tanning agent. These salts are introduced as the hides soak and tumble in the tanning drum.
Chrome tanning, even though it was really discovered in the late 1800s, it didn't really become into use until the 30s. And that's when our grandfather started really producing in a large way.
Each tannery has its own unique formula to make the chrome agent, developed over decades of experimentation. Chromium salts, sulfuric acid, and other proprietary elements are used in recipes that are highly prized trade secrets.
We have our own formula, of which we think is unique, that is evolved over, over many years of fine-tuning and adjustments.
The chrome deposits itself within the microscopic fibers of the skin, forming a water-resistant, bacteria-resistant bond. After 22 hours in the tanning drum, the chrome has been absorbed into the hides. As a result, their color has changed into what is commonly called wet blue. The 30,000 hides are immediately wrung for excess moisture. They then undergo a series of steps that prepare them for their end use.
It's pretty key that we understand our customers' process so that we can design our product to best fit their process.
The first step is called splitting, whereby the top outer portion of the hide, which features the leather's grain, is separated from the hide's soft, fleshy underside, which has no grain at all. Each has its own commercial appeal and end uses.
The under portion that is split off is called a split, and that goes into products such as suede leather.
Alternatively, the top grain is featured in most leather products. But in order for manufacturers to work with it, Prime must guarantee a uniform thickness.
We were trying to control the operation within 1/10 of a millimeter. Now, we have certain variabilities, so I would suggest that the accuracy of the machine would be plus or minus 0.2.
After a final inspection, 80% of Prime's wet blue is sent abroad to international leather makers. The remaining 20%, about 9,000 hides, are transferred to Prime's upper tannery in Berwick, Maine, where tanners oversee the final stages of leather creation.
This is when we move into what I consider really the beginning of the actual production of leather. This is where it really begins to get fun.
Finishing is the name for the collective processes that turn wet blue into the rich, colorful, and aromatic leathers with which we are all familiar. When it arrives in Maine from Missouri, the wet blue is again placed in a tanning drum, where it undergoes 3 final wet processes. The total time required is no more than 6 hours. During the first step, called retanning, a second set of tanning agents is introduced to the leather. Depending on the leather's end use, these agents can be derived from vegetables, man-made syntans, or mineral agents, all of which impart specific qualities of feel and uniformity to the leather. To enhance the natural beauty of leather, aniline-type dyes are then introduced to the bath. These dyes, which are derived primarily from petroleum, come in a wide variety of colors and form an insoluble compound once they enter the leather's fibers. How fast or slow these dyes are introduced will greatly affect the leather's color. The final step is fat liquoring, which introduces certain oils into the leather.
Leather will form around you, and it has a membrane. And by providing the oils, we're protecting the collagen fiber structure within a skin, within a hide. And as we do subsequent operations to it, drying, conditioning, and the finishing operations, those oils continue to act as a barrier so the leather can remain and have its breathability and its strength characteristics.
Once these final wet processes are completed, the new leather hides must be dried.
We want to be able to take it through the drying process, but not dry out all the natural waters and all the oils that we put in. So controlled drying is one of the more critical mechanical steps in our operations.
Prime is one of the few tanneries in the country to offer all three of the different drying techniques. Techniques that have evolved over decades. The first is toggling. Reminiscent of ancient drying methods, it stretches the leather. A toggling team will connect more than 50,000 toggles a week during the constant flow of leather hides. The second is pasting, which yields the most square footage per hide. Here, the side is literally pasted to a glass plate, then sent into an oven where strict temperature controls are maintained. The third and final drying option is vacuum drying, the fastest of the three. Individual wet hides are placed between two heated stainless steel plates, which vacuum dry the leather in 3 to 8 minutes. Each drying method has its own advantage.
If we're looking to have a leather that has minimal oil content and has a very tight grain structure, then those leathers tend to go through the vacuum drying process. If we're looking for leathers that tend to go into very rugged outdoor type of footwear, then those leathers go through our pasting process. If we're looking for leathers that have a very soft and supple feel for it, whether it's athletic footwear or furniture upholstery, then those leathers tend to have more oils and fat liquors associated with their fiber structure. So those will go through our toggling operations, which provides much more stretch into the leather.
Once dry, the grain side undergoes a final series of processes during which it is mechanically stressed, buffed, and then coated with abrasion and stain-resistant materials. Altogether, it has taken less than a week to make a fine piece of leather. At each of the 19 individual steps, the tanner makes his indelible mark on the hides, creating the leather which can now be fashioned into the products that make up our daily lives.
It's someone who has a great technical knowledge and can do the chemistry, but it also has to have a style and a feel for leather. Because you can have a piece of leather that, by rights, is made properly, but just doesn't look right. It's a little too plasticky looking, it's a little too bright, maybe the break's just not quite right. And that's all learned. You have to love making leather.
But even with 21st century know-how, some people are so passionate about leather, but they still make it the old-fashioned way. In fact, they can get downright prehistoric. Leather is so durable that when discovered inside the wreck of the Titanic, leather satchels, purses, and shoes were still fully intact. Leather will return on Modern Marvels, here on the History Channel. Such as chrome salts and tanning drums have propelled the science of leather making forward. Yet for some, the old ways will always remain the best.
There are some technologies that have not been replaced by modern technologies because we can't surpass them in any way. It's really fun when you run into something like that. I personally think buckskin is one of them, brain tan buckskin. There's no other leather that we make by modern processes that comes close to it in its suppleness, in its feel, and in its durability.
Husband and wife team, Tamara Wilder and Stephen Edholm, have spent 17 years mastering the Native American technique of brain tanning as part of their larger study of paleotechnics.
It literally means ancient arts and technologies. Paleo is ancient, and technics is arts and technologies. It's not just technologies, but the artistic side of technologies as well.
At their camp in the hills of Northern California, Wilder and Edholm approach brain tanning using methods and tool designs that date back to the first modern humans, beginning with the arduous task of fleshing the hide.
This is a traditional tanning knife. So what you're doing is you're just bulldozing off all of this flesh and fat. And I'm not going to cut the hide because I have a smooth beam surface. And I'm just pushing all this off. See all this fat and meat that's coming off?
Although metal tools work faster, ancient bone tools can do the job just as well.
If I'd wanted to, I could be fleshing this with a bone tool, a traditional old tool, which has probably been used in excess of 12,000 years around the world. And it's made out of a cannon bone of an elk, and it's called a toothed flesher. And the way this works is it's got a really fancy handhold, which is incredibly brilliant, we think. You twist this, and this wraps against your wrist, and it gives your wrist support. And then I hit into the skin this way. And the teeth grab the flesh and peel it off.
In under an hour, the deer hide is fleshed and ready to be degrained. The sturdy grain within the skin just beneath the hair is removed, exposing an underlying layer that will make the buckskin soft and pliable.
So I'm not just removing the hair, I'm removing this layer of skin. See, that's what I'm removing there.
Once the hide is fleshed and degrained, it's left to dry.
So there's the finished scraped hide. So now the next step is to dry the hide out. So I drape it over a line, or I can stake it out to dry it out flat. And the reason I dry it is then when I soak it up to do the braining process, this membrane layer, which is on this side, which you can't see, will release, and I can remove it, and then we go with the softening process.
Surprisingly, drying makes the skin more accepting of the brain-based softening agents to follow. Many hides are dried from 6 months to a year. Once the drying is finished, the brain tanning can begin. The brains are cooked to destroy pathogens and then mashed into a fine solution.
Other things that have been used historically are spinal fluid, which has the same chemicals as are in the brain, the spinal fluid of eels, things like that, fish eggs.
For the brains to fully penetrate the hide, it's crucial to stretch and open the fibers. Once the brain solution has softened the hide, the emerging leather is again scraped and bathed.
When we soak the hide in the brains, the fatty acids from the brains penetrate the skin and coat these fibers and lubricate them and allow us to manually soften the skin, moving it all the time to keep the fibers stretched and fluffed apart. After that, we'll smoke it over a slow fire, and the smoke penetrates the skin and forms small chemical bonds between the fibers of the skin, locking them open.
Stephen builds a fire in a deep pit, using tree bark as kindling. The hides are attached to a skirt that creates a funnel for the dense smoke.
This is what we like to see, this billowing smoke.
Within 20 minutes, the hide takes on the distinctive color and texture of a fine piece of leather.
Now I'm going to untie this and then reach in and turn it inside out. And this is the magic when you get to see the smoke color come out. It starts to look like buckskin.
Once a hide has been smoked, it's officially leather. When complete, the smoked hide is durable, washable, and warm, and a small piece of living history.
The tactile experience of doing these processes, it wakes something up in your brain. This is every human's common ancestry. We're doing Stone Age living skills, and every human alive on the earth today has ancestors back in their history who did these skills and who were good at them.
No one knows exactly when tanning was first discovered. Greek warriors in the 13th century BC protected themselves with leather armor, as Homer notes in the Iliad. And from Gaul to Jerusalem, Rome's armies wore leather-soled shoes and carried leather shields. In fact, leather shields would remain commonplace in many armies well into the 18th century. During the Middle Ages, Muslim nations became leading producers of fine leather, especially Moroccan goatskin, which is still highly prized today. The goatskin was placed in large vats and soaked with fruit and vegetable extracts, rich in natural tannins. Those tannins could produce greater varieties of leather than brain or other animal matter, even as the process took nearly 9 months to complete. By the 12th century, these ancient alchemies have been codified into a more exacting science.
In the 12th century in the UK in particular, and also throughout Europe, guilds had been established to control the actual processing of leather and to install a degree of consistency and quality.
For the next 700 years, the science and art of tanning would change only incrementally, until the 19th century, when American leather makers embraced new frontiers and furthered an industrial revolution. Choices for the leather buyer in ancient Rome included leather made from jackals, hyenas, wolves, bears, and even leopards. Leather will return on Modern Marvels. Ask any rodeo cowboy, and he'll tell you that in the competition between man and beast, only the toughest survive. And since the days of the Old West, the toughest cowboys have always worn leather. At Muir and McDonald, one of America's oldest tanneries, they still make leather just as their forefathers did when the company opened in 1863. In fact, no new piece of machinery has been purchased here since 1937. And the factory retains its antique flavor and natural light. Now run by the family's 4th generation, Muir and McDonald's primary product has been the same for decades: steer leather, the ideal material for saddle makers.
Our production is 60 hides a week, which is pretty small compared to some of the other tanners. Generally, though, we're looking for a good, full-grown native steer, and we like the hides to weigh at least 70 pounds apiece.
Unlike today's large-scale commercial tanneries, Muir and McDonald's creates their leather using an historic method known as vegetable tanning. Rather than using chrome salts, vegetable tanners rely on natural chemical compounds called tannins, a word derived from the Celtic for oak. Tannins can be found in vegetables, fruits, and especially tree bark, which has particularly high concentrations. Because they're based in Oregon, Muir and McDonald relies on the bark of the local Douglas fir for their tanning extract.
We grind 1,400 pounds of bark twice a week. We have large wooden vats that we cook the bark in, and basically it's like percolating coffee. Is about as close as I can get to explain how it works.
Vegetable tanning is not for the impatient or careless. After hair removal and prep, the tanning process requires 10 weeks to complete, during which time steadily increasing levels of bark tannins are applied. Hides are draped over a rope inside the tanning vessel and kept in constant motion for 12 to 14 hours a day in a procedure known as rocking. This motion keeps the tannins stirred and opens the hide to their absorption.
That looks good.
After 10 weeks in the tanning pits, the hides are placed inside a stuffing wheel, where oils lost during tanning are replaced. The resulting leather is handsome, sturdy, and ready to be carved, tooled, and embossed by a saddle maker. In 1980, Muir and McDonald was designated an historic national landmark, an apt tribute to nearly 150 years of American craftsmanship.
And I can't explain why I've been here for 22 years, except that I get a real enjoyment out of taking something that's a raw piece of material like a cowhide and taking them all the way through the process and having a beautiful piece of leather at the end. So I think once it's in the blood, I think it's there to stay.
In fact, leather making has been in America's blood since a pilgrim named Philemon Dickerson began making leather almost upon his arrival in 1620. And as America expanded westward, pioneers adopted ancient techniques from the Native Americans they encountered. Leather made in factories like Muir and McDonald's traversed the Oregon Trail, fought in the Indian Wars, and pursued commodities like gold and furs across the West. Later, celebrity cowboys like Buffalo Bill Cody made leather clothing their signature style. But the Industrial Revolution created new demands for leather and gave rise to new innovations in leather making. Nowhere was that more true than in the Northeast Corridor, once the proud center of America's leather industry. Of all the towns that symbolize American leather, none was more prominent than Peabody, Massachusetts.
Peabody was the leather capital of the world from about 1900 to 1950. And they made more leather in Peabody, a town of 15,000, 20,000 people, than any place else in the world.
Because of Peabody's unique confluence of rivers and streams, it was an ideal location for the water-reliant process.
The tanners were a very inventive group. They were entrepreneurs, they were gamblers, they were men that were going to make money, and they had a lot of power.
Under their direction, the American leather-making industry became an international giant. The first chrome tanning process was developed in 1884, and the introduction of the tanning drum greatly increased the number of hides that could be processed in a single wash. By 1940, Peabody featured more than 50 major tanneries and related industries, and processed more than 27 million hides annually. But less than a century later, no tanneries remained. The Depression, consolidation, and especially international competition all contributed to the decline of Peabody and the American leather industry.
The whole thing, it grew, it flowered, and there were thousands and thousands of people that had a good life here, but it passed its day.
The final straw came when environmental regulation focused on the industry's decades-old practice of chemical dumping and its consequent pollution.
Historically, the tanning industry has not been a particularly good neighbor. Going back to ancient times, they used to ban the tanner from the town and make him live outside the town wall.
Biosolids from animal flesh, chrome salts, dyes for finishing, all are essential tools of the tanner. But they're also toxic pollutants, which for too long were flushed daily into local waterways.
Boston Harbor was one of the most polluted places in the country. Salem Harbor was also polluted from the runoffs of the tanneries.
Today, American tanneries such as Prime are at the forefront of environmental efforts within the leather industry. On average, Prime uses more than 1 million gallons of water every day, and most of it will blend with chromium, a pollutant.
All of the chrome effluents and wastewaters are diverted into a chrome recovery system, and ultimately 20% of the chrome that we use in our tanning process comes from our chrome recycling plant.
All water leaving Prime must meet strict environmental codes. Sulfites and biosolids are removed both through chemicals and a biological process that occurs in a 3 million gallon aeration lagoon. From there, the water is diverted to a local treatment facility for further purification.
From all these biosolids that we generate, we add a chemical or a polymer to help remove the water. Now, this solid material is transported to farms around the St. Joseph community area, and we generate basically 100 tons a day, 3,000 tons a month, which is added, actually is registered as a fertilizer, and we provide at this time free of charge to farmers.
Over the course of a year, that's enough fertilizer to blanket 2,500 acres of Midwest farmland. But cowhide is just one kind of American leather in demand. In fact, many leathers can get downright exotic. Peabody wasn't the only leather center in New England. By the first decade of the 20th century, more than 50,000 buggy whips a week were made in Westfield, Massachusetts, earning it the title Whip City. Leather will return on Modern Marvels. The samurai, one of history's most formidable warriors. To each, a sword was not only the source of power, but an extension of the soul. As such, the blade was honed of the finest steel, and the grip made of shagreen, a leather derived from the stingray. It's so durable that it assured the samurai's grasp of his sword even when covered in his enemy's blood. It was Marco Polo who in the 13th century first traded his own leathers for the rare and mysterious species of the East. And since that time, our fascination for exotic leathers has only intensified.
The exotics are, for the most part, more primitive animals. Many of them are unchanged in the fossil record. And as such, they are armored animals. They were built for war.
Gliding underwater, a stingray's back appears light and smooth. But when dried, it forms small, nearly ceramic beads.
The stingray skin is composed of these little hard beads of dentile, maybe about the equivalent of 60 or 80 grit sandpaper, that are growing out of a true leather substrate.
To transform stingray into shagreen, the tanner must apply agents like chrome that penetrate the armor in order to transform the dermal layer beneath. Once the leather is formed below, the tanner buffs the dentile beads to create the unique sheen.
In this case, the skin was left in full bead, as you find it in sword grips from medieval times.
However, the tanner may also choose to buff off the top of the cone-shaped beads, creating a stunning effect.
It causes a little window into the cartilage, and it becomes this exotically speckled surface. It throws a great deal of light, and I find it fascinating.
Throughout history, shagreen's special beauty and durability have made it a favorite of Eastern warriors and Western emperors alike, including Napoleon. But shagreen isn't the only exotic with dramatic visual appeal. And today, many species provide strikingly handsome leathers. Often, this visual mystique is enhanced by the potentially deadly nature of their source.
Here's an example with two pythons, one African, one Vietnamese. This is, as the snake goes through the forest, this is the pattern that you'll see. This is the back. And then the belly has been cut down the middle, and so you're seeing the larger scales on the side.
But of all the exotics, none has proved more popular or more prized than the crocodilian.
The gradation in the crocodilians goes from caiman to saltwater croc to American alligator. The American alligator is the platinum standard of the crocodilians.
Like cattle, American alligators have been a source of food and hides for centuries. With the advent of chrome tanning in the late 19th century, alligator leather became more flexible and malleable. It was soon a fashionable option for many leather craftsmen.
Part of the beauty is the irregularity, and there's always a surprise. You would match for color, and you would probably match for scale size, but the natural variations are highly desirable and are what make the American alligator an outstanding, outstanding material.
Today, the production of alligator leather is at an all-time high. Many of the chrome tanning techniques and tools used by the cowhide industry are employed by alligator manufacturers as well. These include tanning drums, which lead to the crocodilian version of wet blue. Only during finishing do the real differences begin to emerge, as the alligator tanner must take special care with the hide's glaze, color, and pliability. After the hide has been retanned, dyed, fat liquored, and then dried, the tanner will apply two unique processes to the alligator leather's finish. The first is glazing, which polishes the hide with an agate stone to maximize the leather's special sheen. The second, called bombaying, renders the once tough alligator more malleable through an intense steaming process. These processes have been refined over the past century and have proven to be highly successful. In fact, by the late 1960s, alligator leather manufacturing had become too successful, with alligator populations near extinction. In 1973, the American alligator was placed on the endangered species list. But through high-tech breeding techniques, which include nurturing substantial numbers of young alligators on farms, the alligator population is now flourishing.
It has been one of the most successful ecological management comeback stories in the 1990s and into our century.
And today, the American alligator is no longer on the endangered species list. Meanwhile, advancing technology strives to duplicate on a mass scale this material that nature has taken thousands of years to perfect. Depending on its quality, raw alligator leather can cost a fine bootmaker more than $1,000 for one pair of boots. Leather will return on Modern Marvels.
Ain't black and white.
Directly to you for held America.
The natural world provides the finest and most exotic leathers. But that hasn't stopped technology from trying to surpass it.
Leather is so hard to duplicate. They keep trying, but they just can't quite duplicate it with anything synthetic.
For science, the goal is not only match, but improve leather's attributes, and to do so faster, at a lower cost, and with much more variety.
The size, and then also durability. You can wash. It is very easy care. And also the colors. The colors, you can almost come out with almost any color possible. There's a limitless of colors, color choices you can actually have.
Collectively, those efforts are known as synthetic leather.
The earliest examples of synthetic leather that I've come across go back to about the 1850s, which was a time of new industries, new technologies in every field.
In 1910, that experimental fervor led the chemical maker DuPont to purchase the Fabricoid Company of Newburgh, New York. For more than 100 years, DuPont chemists had been making gunpowder and explosives, but Fabricoid would be its first foray into the science and manufacture of synthetic materials.
If you're making Fabricoid, you basically had 300 or 400 yards of a cotton-like fabric that was coated with several layers of film.
That film was made of inexpensive nitrocellulose that could easily be mass-produced and was later embossed and finished to look like real leather. Fabricoid quickly became a staple for auto manufacturers who used it for convertible tops. But by the end of World War II, Fabricoid was replaced by a new generation of more durable vinyl-based synthetic leathers. The most famous of these was Naugahyde, which arrived just in time for the post-war boom. For the first time, furniture and upholstery that looked like leather was available to everyone.
The coming of synthetics has allowed people to have things that they wouldn't have been able to afford before. And that's a good thing.
Naugahyde is made from polyvinyl chloride, the second most common plastic in the world. The vinyl can be mixed in many colors and is squeezed onto a fabric base in a process called calendering. But while Naugahyde proved to be a popular upholstery, particularly in the automotive industry, neither it nor any other vinyl synthetic leather was a viable option for the garment and shoe sectors. It simply didn't breathe. In 1963, DuPont launched the most aggressive assault ever on real leather, targeting its biggest market, shoes. The product was called Corfam.
The coming of Corfam was like a specter, like a nightmare to the tanners of America. If DuPont was coming in with a synthetic leather, the tanners had to watch out.
With Corfam, DuPont believed it could duplicate the success it had achieved in 1940 with the introduction of nylon, which had overtaken silk in less than a decade. But even before Corfam was introduced, real leather makers decided to fight back.
They started marketing campaigns to try to tell people how you shouldn't dare put your children's foot in shoes that was something other than leather. But this was building over a period of about 3 or 4 years before the actual introduction.
Corfam debuted in 1963 and was the centerpiece of DuPont's pavilion at the 1964 World's Fair in New York. Made from a hydrocarbon-based synthetic leather substitute, Corfam breathed almost like real leather, was equally durable, and could easily be wiped clean. And yet, despite DuPont's $100 million investment in development and marketing, it failed.
You know, if you've ever bought leather shoes at a shoe store, the first day or two, they're a little bit uncomfortable, and you're accustomed to the fact that over a period of several wearings, the shoe will adjust to the eccentricities of your foot. That didn't happen with Corfam. It was like putting on a new pair of shoes every day.
Corfam and genuine leather had gone toe-to-toe, and real leather won. But even as Corfam was failing, overseas, a Japanese scientist named Miyoshi Okamoto created the world's first microfiber. Soon after, another scientist perfected a process to transform that fiber into an amazing non-woven fabric to be sold under the brand name Ultra Suede.
What makes leather leather is a fine network of entangled fibers made out of collagen, a natural material. What the new generation of microfiber leathers do is mimic that.
Ultra Suede begins with polymer microfibers that are spun so light and fine that a single fiber measuring more than 50 miles long would weigh less than a single gram. These microfibers are then spun together in strands that still allow the individual microfibers to float within the larger whole. This mirrors the fibers in real and then combined in a series
They were an advanced people, though not to be there, but and could be on the stars. The next